agenda.
Madam Vice President, I move that we adopt the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Reverend Williams. Okay.
I vote aye.
I also vote aye.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the August Attendance Award. Do we have that?
We got it. We're good.
There you're already up there.
I'm ready.
Gee.
Yes. So this is the first attendance award for this school year, and McCarter Elementary is the winner for August at just under 98% attendance for the first few weeks of school. So I'd like to invite Ms. Cooney up to accept the award on behalf of McCarter Elementary.
Great.
And you get to take the traveling trophy with you and your certificate for August. If you want to share with the board just a little bit about what you did before school started as you're working here.
Well, August was a short month, so I am still honored to have 98% attendance. I was thinking, like, what could I have done that the other schools didn't? And just one of the things I was sure to do, I looked over my Tyler Pulse data fairly early, and I noticed some errors. And then I got with Karen Klein and Dr. McDonald and my secretary, and we just cleaned up our data. So Tyler Pulse has been very helpful in monitoring attendance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the board? I forgot. Usually hearing somebody else say that. Okay. Well, I just thought you got that. Didn't you receive the award more than once last year?
We got it two times last year.
Yes, I thought you did. So that's a great start for the year for you. Thank you. Okay. The next item on the agenda here are public comments. And I have one request for public comments. As you all know, we read a document before that happens, but each patron will be limited to one appearance not to exceed 3 minutes in duration, and comments will be limited to a cumulative of total of, it's 3 minutes is what you get. Each patron must take their name and address for the record and the topic they wish to address, and may not defer their time to another patron. Patrons will appear on the first-come, first-served basis. Public communications will be respectful. Failure to observe the requirements of this policy may result in the privilege to address the board. In the event the board believes that the normal flow of business is being unnecessarily delayed, it may waive public participation. Allegations of complaints against individual employees are not allowed in an open public meeting. These must be presented in writing to the superintendent and must be signed by the individual or organization submitting the comments. Allegations or complaints against the superintendent are not allowed in an open public meeting, but must be presented in writing to the president or clerk of the board. And we have Dennis Payne. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Dennis Payne, 1147 Southwest Camden Lane. This is kind of new to me. I've never been in public communication in front of you guys before. The reason I'm here is last night about 5 o'clock we got notified that the Finance Committee is going to recommend that the school move their property and liability insurance and auto insurance to a relatively new pool here in Kansas called the Kansas Education Risk Management Pool. And I have to admit to you, I was pretty flabbergasted when I got that news. You know, I've got a long history and relationship with this school district. My grandparents graduated from 501, my parents did, my sister and I did, my wife did, and all of her family, my kids all did, and now I've got grandkids that are going to. So even to the point where my grandfather, Thomas W. Williamson, was the architect for Topeka High in 1931. And I've been your I call it insurance advisor. Younger people call it risk manager, but I still call it insurance advisor for 501 for 31 years. And my dad was about 20 years before that. And you know, it's gotten to where I don't really think of this account as an insurance account as much, because it's really from my heart and soul. It's where I've always dealt with 501. I just love this account, so I'm sick to death that it's leaving. And the problem I've got with it is that I don't consider it to be apples to apples. If you had another agent come in here with an insurance company such as Travelers, who you're with now, and they had a guaranteed premium, they had an asset, I mean, Travelers is $100 billion, and they beat me by 44,000. I think I could put up with that. I don't think I'd be here tonight if that was the case, because it would have been apples to apples. In the case of this pool, it's not apples to apples. As I said, Travelers is a $100 billion asset company, and the last financial statement I saw in this pool, and it may have changed because I think that was a year or two old, it had 279,000 of assets versus 100 billion. And the pool is also accessible, meaning that if they run low on funds, they can come back to the member districts and assess them, or they call it supplemental payments, but that's what it is, it's assessment. And they also tell you that the chance of an assessment is slim. Well, ask the states of Texas, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Illinois, because all 4 of those pools went broke in the last 3 years. And in Kentucky alone, the biggest school district in the pool has been already assessed $3.1 million, and there's about 10 of them that have been assessed over $1 million. So you can ask them what they think about no assessment. You know, I brought my son, Jonathan, and you just met Rob. He came with me too. And they...
Excuse me, Danny, just a minute. Is that all right to let him go a little bit longer? Can you wind it down pretty
I'm
quickly?
just about done, yeah.
Okay.
And they know more about pools and captives than I do, so what I'm requesting from you tonight, since I know that this item is on the consent list, I'm asking that you take it off the consent list and let us have a discussion about it. You know, I've been involved with this school district for 50 years, and I think I've earned the right to at least express our opinion to you guys before you vote, so that you've got an informed vote for sure about what you're getting into with this pool. So that's my request, is that you take it off consent.
Well, Mr. Payne, even though we might make it, there might be a move to separate it from the rest of the consent calendar so that we can have some discussion, you would not be able to participate in that discussion. And this is the venue that we have set up for people to present. So we do have a lot of information that has been given to us, and I'm sure the board members will have questions about it. But we can't, you would not be able to participate in the discussion that the board would have.
But can we answer questions if they have questions?
If somebody would direct a question to you, I believe that's permissible.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we need to have a motion for, to dispose of our business by consent.
Madam Vice President, I move that the Board of Education approve the items of business by consent as presented and authorize the board president or the superintendent to sign the special project and purchasing contracts for and on behalf of the Board of Education. And after my motion, when it's time for discussion, I'll have one thing. Thank you.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, I just died for the lack of a second. I'm wondering whether or not we might want to take a look at what's on the consent calendar and set aside one of the items that are on it, that's on it.
I have one, it's very minor, probably not the one that's
Everybody's
on
thinking about?
everyone's mind.
Yeah.
Just out of an abundance of caution, I'd like to ask that we separate the personnel report, just because it has my spouse's professional development. And while that is not a conflict of interest for every legal interpretation, because people are paid what they're paid according to the bargaining contract, I still like to just avoid the appearance.
What
Every
number?
time that's there, I just-
Got the number?
Item 9.1, separated.
Anyone else want to pull out one for discussion separately? Well, I think the chair would like to pull out the, if that's permissible. And I've been looking for it on here, I just have the stuff in front. What is it, 14.4? Okay. All right, I'll pull up 14.4 to be handled separately from the consent calendar. I said I didn't get anybody else to do it unless they want to do it. I was going to do it if you don't want to do it. You going to move to do that, John? Okay, second? Okay. So we have a motion and a second to do both of those removals.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Okay, so shall I offer another motion for the balance of everything? Madam Vice President, I move that the Board of Education dispose of business by consent, excluding the two items just mentioned, 14.4 and 9.1, to be considered separately, as presented, and authorize the Board Presidents and Superintendent to sign the special contract and purchasing contracts for and on that.
Okay. Did you get all that? There it is.
Yep. You may, I don't know that you necessarily need to write that Mr. Woods has a family life.
I took that off.
It didn't show up on here, though. Let's see, what do we do? By hand? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, it just looked like it was unanimous, was it? There it comes up.
There, see, now it's.
Yeah, it just came up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, okay, if it's up, everybody will start with, I thought we would do 9.1 first because it's not controversial. Patrick just gets to go out.
Madam Vice President, I move that we approve the personnel report, item 9.1, as presented.
Second, John, Dr. Reverend Williams. Okay, we now have item 14.4. Is there any discussion on 14.4 or questions that you would like to ask of leadership or staff?
Could we maybe start with a staff briefing?
That's
Maybe have Mr. Minky or Mr. Robbins tell us a little bit about the recommendation.
got a lot of stuff on it today. Here. Mr. Robbins?
Coverage from the Briar Payne Travelers Group, as well as Arthur Gallagher and the Kansas Educational Risk Management Pool. I can tell you this will be the third year for the pool. Last year we had an opportunity to bring this to the board. It's not something that we just started looking at a week ago or a month ago. It's something that we've looked at over time. So I can't tell you that. They're two different animals. They really are. But my recommendation stands. We've looked at the data from both sides, and we've looked at it very hard. As I shared with you, there's going to be a considerable amount of savings, whether or not we continue with our traditional method of insuring our property and liability, with the Travelers Group or moving over to the Kansas Educational Risk Management Pool. But after looking very hard at both of those proposals, trying to get both proposals in terms of coverage, and you guys were provided with the coverage details. In my mind, my opinion, they are apples and apples, but they're two different ways of going about doing it. I have utmost respect for you, Denny, Jonathan, you guys. I've listened to your advice for 3 years now. I'll also tell you that they have had a long relationship with Topeka Public Schools, and they've done a good job. They've probably done an outstanding job. Our relationship with Briar Payne Mead isn't being severed. They still meet. We meet weekly with one of their employees on the work comp side of that, and that's still a product we feel they add absolute value to. So that's kind of where we're at, and we got to have coverage on October 1st, so something's got to be resolved tonight. I can tell you that the one comparison of $100 million of Travelers to Kansas Educational Risk Management Pool, and that value has changed. There's $1 million in there, but that pool has aggregate stop loss, like you know, like you've read. Berkeley, so a fair number would be Berkeley and Travelers, or Hartford and Travelers. And I don't think we want to compare Arthur Gallagher and Briar Payne's asset sheets. That wouldn't be fair. So, I think we got to be careful with some of those comparisons. But I can tell you that's where we're at. It's not something that we haven't looked at over time, and our recommendation stands. If you'd like further details into the pool itself, Mr. Hare with Arthur Gallagher is here. He's been in this position before for boards and explaining risk management pools. Arthur Gallagher has 5,000 of them out there that they manage in their book of business, and he could get into the granularity of risk management pools.
Okay, I think probably the board members have questions, so we have questions of Patrick, Mr. Woods, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. So quick question, I guess, help me understand. So I did hear just one thing that sounded somewhat concerning for the novice, deciphering between, what is meant is maybe hyperbole versus, what we can actually really expect. So it sounded like something I gathered from some of the comments and some of the things that were submitted there was maybe more. Is it true that there's more risk with the Arthur Gallagher if, say, a tornado were to blow through, would it be stuck at $1 million out of pocket, or?
No.
Okay.
No. Neither plan, and Jonathan, you told me we can't predict the weather. It doesn't matter whether Travelers but no, not any single type of loss. Is there a different type of coverage?
Okay.
The coverage is coverage. The difference being with the Travelers, the traditional program is there's insurance, just like you have on your home. So when there's a loss, right, your homeowner's insurance kicks in, but there's a deductible under retention, whatever that is for you at home. The risk management pool, the first layer of insurance is the self-insured retention. That's what the members put in. That's that first up to the stop loss, that's where that money comes out of. After you hit stop loss with the Kansas Educational Risk Management Program, insurance kicks in, just like it would kick in at Travelers. It's pure insurance at that point.
So there's no difference in the limit and what that deductible would be?
The limits and deductibles on the comparisons I showed you, I think they match up pretty well. One thing with both programs that we're adding this year is the cyber protection, and I wanted to point that out. But one of the big things, and as you well know, because most of you lived through it, 2011, wind hail claims, pretty tough, right? And Travelers stuck with us, but I think we paid for that too in our premiums. But if you look and look at the comparisons, the deductibles, I think that both have deductibles in a wind hail event. I think the Travelers was $200. I think the Kansas Educational Risk Management was $100,000 on a wind hail event. You go on down that list, they match up pretty well, 50,000, on some of those losses.
Excellent. Those were my other questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? I had some, just because I don't always know what the terms
You
mean.
shouldn't have missed the finance council meeting.
I know, I
Doggone it.
told you, but you didn't send me this stuff until yesterday.
I'm no longer on it, so that's why I have to ask questions.
Could you help me understand something? What I'm really getting at is that we would probably be the largest,
District
in the
pool. That's correct.
okay. So that, we'd be putting a chunk of change in, what is it we're gonna be putting in? I forget, I've looked at it.
But we put in more risk, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
But when I was looking at, I was going back to what you had over here in terms of what happened to us in 2011, and I remember that. We had 22 roofs to replace. It was awful. Plus we had the fire at Topeka High. That was a tough year for our insurance carrier.
Claims loss drives premium.
I know it does. And so
Period.
when I was looking at that, that's a lot, that was just wind, right, predominantly? And hail.
Wind, hail in 2011.
Yeah. So then I was thinking, well, that's a lot of money. And when you talk about the self-insured retention fund, that's the money that we all put in as different school districts. I mean, how much do they have to put in there? How much is sitting in there? Because what struck me is weird. The state told them they could only have, I lost it, $200 and some $1,000 in excess of, I lost where it is. I
That
had it
was
marked.
probably one of the audit documents. I think currently the loss fund, the SIR is at $1 million, and Charlie, if you.
So
add
anything,
to that.
they can't have they can't have much over $1 million in there? Is that what you're telling me? Help me.
No, we-
And that was the part that
Okay,
didn't compute for me,
Let me
just thinking about this large district and our losses.
Let me introduce Charlie Hare with Arthur Gallagher, and he has helped implement and put into play the Kansas pool as well as many others. But I think he can put a better picture together for you for the self-insured retention part, where that stops, where that aggregate stop loss starts, what our exposure is, and then its insurance.
Appreciate everyone's time this evening. My name is Charlie Hare. I'm the consultant and the administrator for the Kansas Educational Risk Management Pool. I was part of the founding program in 2014. The way that, in layman's term, that a pool works is in two facets. Just like any program, you're going to have your fixed costs. So when you think about a traveler's insurance program, your premium paid behind the scenes about, let's say, 60%, 50%, using arbitrary numbers at this point, is going to go to run the operations of the day-to-day in and outs that Travelers has. The rest of it is going to go into a claims fund. That claims fund is then used to pay out claims. But when you think about it, Travelers is not taking on, as to be called schools, $550 million worth of risk. They're going to pay companies on the back end to reinsure that policy.
Right.
So they could be on the hook for 10, they could be on the hook for 100, they could be on the hook for 250 million, but at some point they're going to transfer risk as well. It's no different than what we do in our program. It's the exact same thing, except what we're doing is we're saying that if there's money left over in the claims fund at the end of the year, as opposed to Travelers writing it off as profit on their bottom line, we're actually going to turn around and we're going to give that back to the school districts. How that money is calculated in terms of how we give it back is whatever you make up of that claims fund, you get that percentage back if any dividend received. But the number one knock, so to speak, on pools is that they are accessible. That at the end of the day, if I run out of money in the claims fund, I can come back to you, Topeka Public Schools, and say I need more money. And the way that we get around that is we buy aggregate stop loss insurance. So at the very dollar that we exhaust our claims fund, it becomes a fully insured program. Essentially, the insurance companies then take on all the risk. You as Topeka Public Schools, and I'll use a tornado as an example. Let's say you get hit with a tornado and you have a $5 million loss. You pay your deductible. Your deductible in this case is $100,000. The next $75,000 is then paid out by that pool's money. But let's say that hailstorm or that tornado then goes and hits 6 other districts. We categorize a storm as one occurrence. So that's actually just one singular $75,000 payment, because we look at one storm as a 72-hour period that comes out of that fund. So it's not as though we're paying $75,000 for Topeka and $75,000 for Eudora and $75,000 for Manhattan, if that is the length of the storm, because at the end of the day, we have it on an occurrence basis. So you can kind of start to see how that fund becomes pretty difficult to deplete. But in the event that we do deplete that fund, we do buy that aggregate stop loss protection, so that all of your risk is then transferred right back to the insurance company. So what we say is, this is a fully insured program. By state statute, we have to agree that this is an accessible program because the stop loss is not unlimited. It's $2 million. And what we do is we buy about 8 times the amount of expected predictable loss. If we ever had an instance where we had 8 times predictable loss, we have more than an insurance issue. We have an end-of-the-world issue. So in essence, it is a fully insured program where we transfer all of the risk back to the insurance companies. At the end of the day, the price you see, I hope, is not the price you pay, because what I hope is that we don't use all of that money in the claims fund and we end up giving it back to the school districts.
So are you saying if we had a hurricane like experienced in Houston or Miami, where all the schools are flooded, and that would you have enough money to pay for rebuilding our schools?
We buy a loss limit of $500 million. That is the exact same thing that you are getting from Travelers at the moment. So when you start to think about it, yes, you are sharing a $500 million worth of loss limit. The key is, what we do is we run a probable maximum loss study. We put every building and the worst case weather events into a simulator, and we say, what is the amount of limit that we would need to cover the worst case scenario? And that study last year suggested that we would, with Topeka, public schools in that program need $384 million. Obviously, we're not going to buy anything close to that, so we bought $500 million with limit. So yes, there is enough limit adequately to cover any particular loss. Obviously, we're not dealing with hurricanes up here, but a major tornado event certainly is something that we would be on the hook for. But yes, we do buy enough limit.
What differentiates Kansas from the states that failed?
I would say the major difference is that the pools in which Briar Payne and me referenced, only one is a property and liability pool. The others were workers' compensation funds, completely different animals. And the reason being that when I fund my claims fund, the very next dollar of the stop loss insurance is where it attaches. More often than not in workers' compensation funds, you fund to 50 to 65%. Stop loss usually doesn't kick in until the value of 83%. So there is that gap in which they call the assessment factor. That is technically how those pools had failed, because they had mismanaged money, or because in years prior, nobody expected the rise in cost of medical and cost of drugs as they are today. We have workers' compensation pools within our portfolio that we have assessed. Most workers' compensation pools have assessed at some point as of recent, because of the nature of how things are moving. The one property and liability pool that did fail was TAPS, the Texas Association of Public Schools. It didn't fail, it dissolved. And what I mean by that is they ran out of surplus, and because of the way that the state recommends that they finance them, there were 2 other programs in the state that had enough surplus that they were rolling them into that. Actually, the director of PCAT and I were on the phone earlier today discussing that, because I have a couple of clients down there that I was considering rolling into that program.
Any other questions?
I may have just one, and you tell me if I should save this, if we're going to have discussion on this a little later. Mainly, I just wanted to ask colleagues on the Finance Committee what they thought, since they got a chance to look at this a little bit more in depth.
Actually, I believe only Dr. Morrison and I were present at the time, because Mrs. Kirk couldn't make it. But what I appreciated was the fact as Ms. Murphy has said, this is not something that we made on a dime, a decision we made on a dime. There has been previous years, comparisons that were made before this decision was made. I did appreciate what Mr. Hare shared with us in that meeting as well, as far as clarity, which he's sharing with us today, and I appreciate you being here as well. But I thought it was definitely, I'm leaning heavily on the information that we were given was just so clear, and it was just gave us an understanding as to why, how it best benefits people from the schools, considering our present state financially, but then also the overall coverage that we want.
Mr. Mackey, if I'm to read this comparison chart correctly, that the costs of the Kansas Educational Risk Management Pool is $519,533, is that right? Or what's the difference in the coverages financially?
The difference between the 519,533 and the 753,577.
734. And that's the savings that you're claiming?
No, I mean, the insured cost for the traditional brokerage is $753,577. In order to insure our buildings, same coverage is $709,108. Difference, as Denny mentioned earlier, is about $44,000. The way it's broke out in the Kansas Educational Risk Management Pool program is you're seeing insurance costs and administrative fees, taxes, pooling costs broke out. That's wrapped up in administrative costs. Travelers doesn't do it free. Briarpain doesn't do it free. Nobody does it free. So that's in that number. It's just not broke out.
The potential savings is $43,538. Is that right?
44,000 between these two proposals.
Okay.
$154,000 from our premium last year, or 100 and whatever I told you, 109 on
yeah.
the straight,
Almost
straight
10.
straight pure insurance. So we win in premium costs. That is no doubt. The question is it time to look at a different way of protecting our assets? And you got my recommendation.
Anyone else? I think,
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Mr. Menke said that you have his recommendation. I just want to say that you have our recommendation. Because Mr. Menke and I have had several conversations about this property liability insurance. I can assure you that he has spent several months doing his due diligence, looking at both the traditional way of insuring our assets as we have been in these past few years versus changing to this more modern way, I guess, of doing things with this pool operation. We're well aware of the long-standing relationship that we have with travelers and also pain insurance. But our decision and our recommendation was based on what we felt, after all of the due diligence, what we felt was best for the district. And that's why you have the recommendation in front of you that you do. We certainly don't want to dismiss the long-standing relationship that we have, but we felt that the recommendation should be based on what we felt was best for the district and less about the relationship. And that's why you have a recommendation to go in a different direction than what we have in prior years.
And I apologize, and definitely, yeah, I'm not an island. I'm lockstep with the deputy superintendent. There's no way I'd want to make a decision of this magnitude on my own. There just isn't. And just to be quite frank, in a public meeting, and I think Mr. Hare and Arthur Gallagher and the Kansas Educational Risk Management Program understands and knows that, we have an expectation of the services we need to receive starting October 1st. And so, we may be severing a 50-year relationship here on our property liability. So I expect equal or better, protection coverage, or, we may be back in front of the board at a later date. So we're okay with that too.
Any other questions?
One final question on the chart that was provided in our Word docs documents. There are, for traditional brokerage insurance coverage, there's some column or some lines, crime, for example, educators, legal, that are not broken down in the cost for the pool. I assume those are still covered?
Under the crime,
Well, there's a crime, education, legal, cost for crime is $2,000.
yeah,
So those
I
are
see
all,
what you're saying. You're on that. You're
I
still
wanna-
on the cost page.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're included in that property umbrella of costs. The crime, educators, legal, and law enforcement, they're not free. They're part of that $425,000 number. I don't think they're free. We'll take free, but they're not free.
Okay, any other questions? And I would echo what Mr. Allen is saying. I mean, to have to sever, if that's what we do tonight, to sever a relationship that we've had for longer than I've been around, not in the world, I have to admit, but then in terms of being on the school. I mean, it's a tough thing to do, and I guess I have one question in relation to that. How long, these are what, 2-year contracts?
Yeah.
Is that the standard what we have with the,
Two-year commitment.
I'm sorry?
It's a 2-year commitment. Yeah.
And that's a standard what we would have with travelers? No,
One year.
it's just 1 year with them.
Yeah.
But this requires us to have a 2-year commitment. Okay. All right. Somebody's want to say something. I add to it.
Madam Vice President, could I just offer 2 simple things that I think I'm missing that potentially 501 is?
You'll have to go up to the mic if you're going to do that.
My name's Rob Metzl. I'm a principal at Briar Payne Mead, and my career is based on self-insured pools, captives, self-insured programs. That's all I do. The 2 things you need to understand is that when they talk about a $2 million ag on the loss fund, after that's exhausted, then the school district, the 501 being the largest member, a 20% plus stakeholder, is liable for its percentage for any of the excess funds. So you're looking at a savings of $44,000 with an unknown, and they'll say, actuarially, we've run the loss picks. I run loss picks every day. I put 60% of the premium into the loss fund. They've put 13% into the loss fund. They can tell you all day long that this is more than adequately funded. The actual studies have been done, and the Titanic was not going to sink. The second thing the board needs to understand is if the program fails, and the program fails if Kemper, Berkeley, Hartford suffer some claims and they decide to exit. Gallagher was very straightforward in pointing out they only got 1 bid out of all of the admitted carriers in the state of Kansas to back this pool. So if there is adverse loss experience, and we all know we have storms in Kansas, and Berkeley says, Hartford says, guys, thanks, this has been fun, but we're out, okay? The pending claims going forward, the unknown claims become the liability of the members. There is no guarantee that the insurance company will fund what we call in our world incurred but not reported losses. That falls back on the members. In a study that the Kansas Statewide Efficiency Review, the state of Kansas funded this, Gallagher even commented why the state said, hey, this pooling arrangement should help be efficient, it should save costs for smaller school districts. But the top 10 school districts should not join this pool, per Arthur J. Gallagher, in the Kansas Fund. I have copies of that for you, and I have copies of my 2 concerns. If the pool goes down, okay, you are responsible for the claims. The tail is what we call it. I have dozens of clients in programs. I have absolute unlimited aggregate to cover the loss fund. Okay, there is no exposure to anyone that we put into pools. Second of all, the insurance company, in this case the Hartford, stands behind our programs. If the programs go down due to adverse loss experience, the insurance company takes the claims liability. This program is not backed by the insurance company. If it goes down, you have the liability. The Kansas Guarantee Fund, they would point out, backs the insurance carriers. They're protected. The pool is not protected. The insurance company is protected if it can't pay its claims. The pool has no guarantee. You are the guarantee of the pool. That potential future liability, not to mention the unfunded claims pool that has this $2 million aggregate that is never going to be impacted, you need to understand you have that liability. It's unknown, you can't budget for it, and for a $44,000 savings, you're taking on that risk. Thank you very much. I have copies of both the Kansas Statewide Efficiency Program talking about this with Gallagher's comment, as well as these 2 key points laid out. And we do thank Gary. We've had a tremendous relationship with Gary.
We still have a builder's risk relationship with you.
We
Right.
manage.
Yeah, if you'd like to, you can give the, what's your handouts to the clerk of the board.
Charlie, did you want to address any of that, or that's up to the board? What I do want to point out, and I think I have, is
Yeah, we have to keep,
Yeah.
you're talking, the problem is we're sitting here, we trust you all,
yeah.
but there are some things here that we sit in, those of us who are not as knowledgeable, this is tough stuff, and so just to make a good decision for our kids and our patrons and everybody else is tough, so
Why
thank
we're
you.
here, and we were prepared for that.
Okay.
So claims loss, just to remind, claims loss drives premium. So in 2011, our premium didn't stay the same.
The next year
it went up
it went up.
48%.
Yeah.
And the year after that, it went 40. So claims loss drives. There's risk involved in every program in terms of what your cost is going to be next year. So.
Thank you. There's a lot that I don't disagree with. Everything he said for the most part was correct. I do think that there is a difference between self-insurance when it comes to an individual entity and self-insurance when it comes to a group. The $2 million, we're kind of getting hung up a little bit too much on here, being that we have a claims fund of $1 million to pay out $75,000 in each property occurrence, $50,000 in each liability occurrence. Actuarial science determines that. We have numbers and numbers behind the scenes. Those people are way smarter than I am. What needs to be said is that claims fund is actually funded to the average of the group over the last 5 years, multiplied by what we call a loss cost multiplier. Typical, just in layman's terms, that number is about 1.785 times the amount of the average of the program. So we're already kind of building in a little buffer into our claims fund, basically saying, let's hope we don't have 2 times expected loss. And then we're going to add another $2 million on top of that. With the emergence of Topeka Public Schools in the program, that number will increase. It's the nature of how we have to do things with the Department of Insurance. Kansas statute 12-2621 states that we have to have 70% of our overall costs in some sort of a loss fund, which includes the excess costs as well. So while Topeka Public Schools is paying 13.5% into that fund, what's not being taken into consideration is that $2 million, because it is actually not cost to you, it is cost to the program as overall. while 13.1% is what Topeka is paying, we have school districts that are paying 70–80% of their overall costs into that fund just because actuarial science determined that that's what they need to pay. They have a lot of, let's call it small risk, but they have more risk in terms of the claims that they've had over an annualized basis. 60% in terms of what you would fund in an individual self-insurance program is accurate. I'm not going to stand here and disagree with that. I would question the board to also try and find a program that Arthur Gallagher has had a property liability program that we have actually assessed. It's never happened, and we were the ones who found it pooling across the country. It started with the Archdiocese of Chicago in 1958. We have assessed workers' compensation rules. That's very well known, but we have not assessed a property liability pool, nor have we ever had any sort of a pool that we run from property liability worker compensation failed or dissolved. Our reputation precedes ourselves. We have 110 pools across the country that we manage. Of the 400 and roughly 20 that are operating, half of which are run by state entities. I think it needs to be also said that about 60% of the student count across the United States is actually being insured under a program structure similar to this. This isn't a new concept. It exists in many ways across the country. It's just new to the state of Kansas. And the reason being is that you all have stringent laws which actually benefit you because we have to roll up through the Department of Insurance and dot every I and cross every T. To address the feasibility study with Alvarez and Marshall, it does say in there, by the way, that we made that comment. We did not make that comment. We were asked about our opinion of what we thought pools could be. We referenced that they did these studies in North Carolina and Louisiana in conjunction with our offices there. But I can for certain say that I was the one who spoke with Alvarez and Marshall, and I did not say the top 10 in Kansas cannot be pooled. In fact, if I'll go on the record here and say that I think the only one that doesn't really fit into this program is Wichita Public Schools.
Any more questions? Mr. Woods?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, and I don't mean to belabor the point. I just want to understand a little more. Can you help kind of shine a little bit more light on the report? Why would they, what was their rationale in layman's terms?
Certainly.
For the 10 largest districts, and they go on to specifically state that at least 6 of the 10 largest districts are especially recommended. So what are they saying and why? So I understand.
Yeah, there is a very clear separation as to where the population is in Kansas. It's very similar in the state of Louisiana, which is the feasibility that they did before this. We write almost every school district in the state of Louisiana through our Lake Charles, Louisiana office. In fact, the lady who heads up our public sector and scholastic practice, who I roll up through, is out of that office. In population centers in school districts across the country, it is seen that about 5% of school districts actually make up roughly about 60–70% of the overall student count in specific states. Theoretically, the thought process is that those school districts are big enough to do this on their own. You kind of can see that in what Wichita Public Schools is doing, in what Blue Valley Public Schools, to an extent, is doing, and definitely with what Olathe Public Schools is doing. Kansas City, Kansas, Topeka, even Manhattan, Salina, Garden City, they all kind of seem to be on a similar path, and that is purchasing large deductible programs from various entities and various insurance companies across the state. Case in point being Salina, USD. They're a recent client of ours. Very, very similar program structure to the one that Topeka has in place currently. I think their savings were somewhere around the $100,000 number as well, and we did increase coverage a little bit. But we're talking, minute details here. I think at the end of the day, what we really need to kind of hone in on is this is a fully protected program. It's a fully protected program in an area of the state where your student count isn't all that rash, out of whack comparative to what the other members of our pool are. Salina USD, Derby USD, Hazel USD, 6,000 to 8,000 students. We have programs all across the country that have school districts with as little as 2,000 200 kids to 40, 50,000 students in the same program. In the state of Kansas is a little bit different because we don't have as much of population centers as we do in other states. I personally run 6 pools, and I can tell you that Minnesota seems to be a very similar landscape in the sense that right around Minneapolis, there's a lot of school districts that have a lot of population. A couple of those don't seem to be good fits for program. In fact, they started their own. Those conversations, to be honest with you, are being had right now in Kansas City. So.
Anyone else? Okay, are we ready to vote? I forgot. Item 14.4, I lost my little cheat sheet here. 14.4. Here. Okay. Did you see what it was? I'm sorry. Ms. Johnson made the motion and Reverend Williams seconded.
What should be open? Okay, there's 1 nay and motion carries.
Right, the next item, excuse me, on the agenda. And did anyone with superintendent update, or we have anything for that particular? Okay. Lois?
I just wanted to share that Dr. Gomez is coming to town this next week to work with both Landon and Woodson and Scott, and then us as a leadership team around our strategic plan for how we move this into high school for dual language. And then wanted to remind you that we have our first standards-based report cards coming out in the next month. And that's pretty exciting. I think teachers are really focused on teaching to the standards, and this is going to make assessing kids more impactful.
It'll be interesting to see how our parents deal with this change. It's going to be a big change for them and understand. I think it makes more sense, but it's change. Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Robbins?
Thank you. I'd just like to call the board's attention to the fact that a mainstay in most of these board meetings will no longer be that after tonight. This is Mr. Jim Russo's last board meeting that he'll be attending as he's going to ride off into retirement at the end of this month.
He'll be literally riding on, doesn't he ride on?
But anyway, I just wanted to make the board aware of that, and certainly appreciate all of Mr. Russo's years of service to Topeka Public Schools. Wish him well in retirement, and we're going to miss your face here. Not so much the music you play at the beginning of the board.
That's a difference of opinion. I want to say thank you.
So the parting gift, I think, as a parting gift, we should all have IT problems really quick. You should fix my computer for me, something.
You know, and when somebody is as dense about a computer as I am, he actually makes house calls because trying to explain it to me over the phone doesn't work. So he has to come out. And that's when I learned that my mouse actually had a battery in it. I just thought I had to go buy a new. So he saved me. I'm just batteries in my, I couldn't believe I was so dumb, but it's not all my mouse doesn't work. I just had to go get a new one. He said, "You check the battery?" And I said, "They have a battery?" Didn't know. Anyway, thank you very much. We sure appreciate all that you've done for us. Okay. Lose my track here where I am. The next item is the action item. This is a resolution number 17007, authorizing the sale of general obligation refunding bond series. And this is the good news one.
We're going to let Mr. Barnberg, you're familiar with him, so.
I know, and I couldn't remember his name on it. I was so embarrassed. I was going to ask him to do the pledge, but I thought I had to give up. I don't know.
Well, Greg, most people just call me Greg from Piper. It's Greg Varenberg. We've been your financial advisor for a number of years now and had the opportunity to help you with the recent bond election, and that went very well. But then even looking back over the time that I've had the opportunity to work with you, there's been a number of opportunities where the board has taken action to capture savings for the taxpayers in the district and lower the interest expense, and that's really what brings us here this evening. But I thought, before I get into the refinancing analysis and the opportunity at hand, I wanted to remind you of the very positive outcome from the recent bond election. And then this refinancing really is an opportunity to improve upon that. But when you, the board and the administration of the district went out and talked to the taxpayers in the district about the proposed bond issue and the bond election and shared some cost estimates with the community.
Mr. Russo.
Of course, it runs out of battery.
It's a battery. And I knew it was a battery. I could tell. I've learned.
I would say that's probably plain. Most people like to cut off the face talk after a minute or two.
Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. As I was sharing with you, we had a very good outcome from the bond sales compared to what was shared with the community, and I thought I would highlight that. When we started the bond election campaign, you had shared with the community an estimated interest rate of about 5.15%. We had a projection of a 6.95 mill levy, and that was going to be a continuation of the mill levy that you've had in prior years and was presented to the community as a no tax levy increase issue. After we were able to sell the bonds, we sold part, $110 million in 2014 at an interest rate of about 3.86%, and then came back with the balance of the bonds in 2016, 3.159%, well below the 5.15%. And your state aid at the time we called the bond election was 44%, and that's continued upward since then. And so what that has done is after the final sale in 2016, we knew that you had a situation where you might be coming in at a mill levy below that 6.95 mills, and that has been the case. I believe your mill levy estimate this year that's going to be finalized here soon, the budget you set this past summer, it looks like the mill levy is closer to 6 mills than that 6.95. So that in and of itself is a lowering of the mill levy and a savings for the taxpayers. But also, I think it's important to note, and I shared with you a black bound handout at the very end of that presentation of the book. As I mentioned earlier, this is not the first refinancing that you've taken advantage of and lowered the expenses for the taxpayers. Just looking back since 2001, you've had 3 other opportunities to capture or take advantage of lower interest rates and capture savings, and that cumulative savings is now about $6.2 million. So that's a very significant amount of money that is staying in the district rather than being paid out to bond investors. Working with the district in part of our role in helping you not only with the new bond elections, but also working with the administration each year on budget-related matters and watching the outstanding bonds and seeing when there's an opportunity to capture an additional savings is part of our role in serving you as a financial advisor. And that's really what led us to meet with the Finance Committee recently and be here this evening and seek your guidance as to whether this is something you would be interested in moving forward with. But when we consider refinancing a bond issue, it's very different than refinancing a home loan, where you take out a new home loan and pay off the entire amount of the outstanding home loan. On a bond issue, we can go in and look at each individual principal payment or year on that bond issue and be very selective in terms of what portion makes the most sense or is most advantageous to refinance. And that's what we've done here. And further, there are some IRS rules related to the issuance of tax-exempt bonds that give you an interest rate advantage if you complete a refinancing of less than $10 million per calendar year. So as we've watched interest rates move around a little bit over the last year, and where we're at currently on interest rates, we looked at all of the outstanding bonds of the district, and then we looked at each individual principal payment and came to the conclusion that there was a very select portion of the outstanding bonds that had the most advantageous or the highest percentage of savings, and that is the 2026, 2027, and 2028 principal amounts from that 2014 issue. Those bonds, they total $8,905,000 in principal amount and have an interest rate of 4%. And obviously 4% at the time, we're pretty excited about that rate on that portion of the bonds, and it's obviously not a very high rate. But what is interesting is that when you look at where interest rates are currently in those years, we can lower that interest rate from 4% down to about 2.34%, so a fairly significant decrease in that interest rate. And then after taking into account the cost associated with completing the bond refinancing, which would be the legal and the financial advisory and the rating fees, the net savings to the district is $370,000, and it's primarily in the years 2023 through 2028, and it equates to about $60,000, $62,000 per year in each of those years. So we had recommended to the administration of the district to take a look at this. That recommendation led to a discussion at the Finance Committee and ultimately the board meeting this evening. So we wanted to share that opportunity with you. Obviously, the savings that we're presenting this evening is an estimate based upon today's interest rates. The first step in a bond refinancing process is to get permission from the board to start working on a refinancing, and that is in the form of an authorizing resolution. One has been presented this evening in case you do want to move ahead. Once we have permission to move ahead, we start working with the rating agency and the bond attorney to prepare the documentation. And if all goes well and interest rates remain favorable, then we would be back to you in about 3 to 4 weeks with the final savings. And at that point in time, we would adopt a bond resolution, which would allow you to lock in the final savings. And if, for example, we start on this process and interest rates go up and the estimated savings goes down, we either wait to see if the interest rate environment improves and we can at a later date capture that savings, or ultimately if rates go up and never come back down and we just miss the opportunity, then we cancel the proposed refinancing and there's no cost to the district, and we just simply move on with the existing repayment schedule that you have, and no change, or you wouldn't be in a worse situation from where you are currently. So we wanted to bring this opportunity to you this evening, see if this is something that the board wants to move forward with, and then if so, we would start working on the issue and hopefully come back to you in the near future with the final savings, hopefully at or above what we're sharing with you this evening. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Woods?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. So, not so much a question as a comment, and mainly I just wanted to tell you thank you. This is great news. I like these kinds of presentations. When I look at this and I think about all the facts, and you just hit two of the key facts, but there's a third one that's really big that's on my mind, but the two that you hit. So first of all, you know, when we estimated that we budgeted that we'd sell these bonds for over 5%, in interest. We ended up actually selling them and locking in for under 4. In one case, 3.95. And I think about the savings that are there, and the fact that we're able to, fact number 2, of course, lower the mill levy on that from above, or just under 7% to below 6%. That's significant there already. I know that we already had significant savings just by those 2 facts, by the interest rate difference. The $370,000 that you mentioned now, I'm incredibly pleased with. The thing I think that's even bigger that I hope our patrons realize, when you think about this, it's really a better financial deal than just that. When you think about the fact that we are growing, we are actually locking in this finance deal, this price, and right now, while we sold these bonds the first time, I think our mill rate was $590,000 or so for 1 mil. We're above 600,000 now. That's only going to keep growing in terms of valuation. Our population at the time was, 13.6 or something like that. I'm assuming we're going to keep growing, even if slow. It's still going to be more. That means there are going to be more patrons in our district, and the valuations will continue to go up. So over the years, we'll still be paying at that same level with more people and more dollars to access spread out over more folks. So it's a much better financial deal, even than just the raw savings that you quoted, which is very conservative. You're a finance guy, that's what you're supposed to do. But if our patrons really think about what we're talking about, this is an amazing deal that's really only more amazing when you think about what it's doing for kids. So in terms of safety, instruction, all of the facility updates, and the college and career things that we're able to do for students that other districts just simply cannot do for no other reason than facilities. So I wanted to use your comments and the points you just made and the nice thought that brought to my head to, first of all, commend our administration for running a tip-top shop here financially. I know a whole lot of other people who run budgets who would love to be able to do what you did. And also to commend my colleagues on the board for vision and for doing this awesome thing. Look what we're able to do for students. We're able to do it with no tax increase already. But even when we start paying it back, we're going to save more money because of our sound financial position and the cost it takes us to actually borrow money to sell bonds, the interest rate. And yet, it's even going to be cheaper than that because we're going to spread it out over more people and more evaluation in the future. So, I guess bravo to everybody. It's a pretty awesome thing for a person, for a taxpayer. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I'd be happy to offer a motion if you need one.
Okay, I was just checking to make sure there are not any comments.
Sorry.
It's an action item.
So I'd move, Madam Vice President, that we approve the resolution number 1707 to authorize the sale of material obligation funding bonds for Series 2017.
You get the second? Hey.
Vote is now open.
Well, thank you.
I'm good with my hand.
Yours isn't working. It's working. I did it. Looking a little slow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll be back soon with good news, and I appreciate
That's right.
You will.
What do you the bond? I think the bond. They're going to be selling some bonds again. The feds are. That going to affect what we're wanting to do? I forgot to ask you that.
Yeah, usually I make it out of or I can't make it out of a presentation without an interest rate prediction, so it's only fitting that I get asked a question like that. But we've had a lot of factors impacting the bond market this year. Proposed changes in Washington, D.C. that can impact tax-exempt bonds and income taxation to world events, to the economy, and now even looking at some of the storms in the Gulf and how those will affect the national economy and inflation and some of the economic statistics. There's a very dramatic spike in interest rates right after the presidential election, and if you look at this calendar year, it's been a fairly gradual, steady decline to where we are now, downward in interest rates. It's looking back at my career of doing this over the last 30 years, I don't think I've seen a year where we've had more factors that have a potential impact on interest rates in the bond market than what we're dealing with right now. And so it feels like we're in a volatile position, but it's been surprising how steady that decline has been throughout the year. So I'm not sure where we're headed from here. There's a lot of things that are being impacted. The Federal Reserve met earlier this week and didn't raise interest rates. So at least we have this window of opportunity, and hopefully it'll hold. So.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
So they sure talked like they were going to with the rosy comments on how great the economy is going, but they're nothing.
I know, it just seems like, when you go from one report and you think, okay, this is it, this is where interest rates start going up, and then something else will happen that kind of tempers that thought process.
So the time is right to sell the bonds and lock in.
Today's a good day, and hopefully tomorrow will hold.
In a couple of weeks, it'll still be a good day. Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just very briefly, it was one of the highlights of the year. I don't always think it's going to be a highlight till I get there. Was the family fitness fundraiser, and just kudos to Chris Wallace and others who helped organize that. And it's fun to see. I don't know how many kids and families, parents, staff we have there, but you ever get a count? Any idea? 1,000, 2,000? It seemed like a lot. Out there having fun together, families having fun together, using Hummer Sports Complex activities where all kids and families can participate. So again, thank you for that. And then Mr. Rousseau, I just echo the comments from Mr. Robbins. I'm not sure who's going to remember my password from now on because I relied on you to do it most of my career here. Would you pass your notes on to Ms. Lister and she can help me get logged in. So thank you for your service.
Perfect.
I just wanted to let board members know that Doug Glenn is back home, recovering. He's doing really well.
Very good.
And I have been having the delightful experience of picking up his grandson from Jardine as my way of helping out. He's a kindergartner at Jardine, at our new elementary. And I've gotten to experience waiting in line and the pickup procedure by car. It's running very smoothly. I'm very impressed with the staff, and everyone has seemed happy and everything orderly. So it's good stuff.
Good. Thank you for the information on Doug. Thank you. Patrick.
Thank you, Madam President. I would just very briefly remind everybody and ask that everybody keep many of our teachers and our students in their thoughts and prayers and well wishes, given the tragedies and the natural disasters that we've seen recently. We've got lots of people with family members from North Texas and Florida. We have a lot of people with family members and a lot of teachers that we just hired from Puerto Rico. And right as we speak right now, there still is zero communication, phone communication, period, with the entire island, and electricity's out for the entire island. So there's a lot of work. They're just now starting to figure out what needs to be done. So in solidarity with all of my friends and our students and their families from Puerto Rico. That's my Puerto Rican pin that one of my Puerto Rican buddies gave me. Also, Mexico City, or the hemisphere's largest city, that is so big with 27 million inhabitants that it is almost impossible for someone from that country not to have somebody in their family, or anyone in that country not to have someone in their family with roots there. So we have a lot of teachers and a lot of students who are going through some unnecessary anxiety, or not unnecessary, it's necessary anxiety, but unhelpful anxiety as they, suffer from that horrendous tragedy there as well. So just ask you to keep them in your minds.
Thank you. Well, it was a pleasure leading this group this evening. And with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.